So guys, just a quick question for you there. When was the first time you went to prison and why?
Hold.
Alright, okay. I thought you kicked it off. Okay guys, so when was the first time you went to prison and why?
1995 for possession with the intent to supply of Class A and B drugs. Aged 18, and I did an 18-month sentence in the Haybank Young Offenders Centre, which is now Haybank College. And the first month before trial, I was held in Crumlin Road Prison in the basement, which was 23-hour lockup per day.
Okay.
I went in 1999. I served a 17-year sentence, 2 years suspended. So I was released in 2011, and I was in nearly every jail in the Republic of Ireland.
Okay.
So I started in Mountjoy, and then I'd been transferred to different jails right throughout the country, what they call sort of I was on a tour, as they say.
On tour.
Yeah. So I spent 11 years and 6 months in the system.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about you, Damien?
My first visit to prison was back in 2005, but the main kind of sentence was for drugs, and that was back in 2006, and it was all in Castlereagh, and then on to open prisons, and then back to Castlereagh and out in 2009. So I've been kind of onwards and upwards from there.
Yep.
Hmm?
What is the biggest misconception when it comes to those coming out of the criminal justice system?
Well, I suppose the biggest one for me is society in general would say, you think they'd cop onto themselves and get a job for themselves and that type of thing. Apparently it's an easy thing to do, but the reality is when you get out of prison, like, you're up against all sorts of systematic barriers, whether it's applying for jobs, applying for insurance, applying for to start your own business, applying for education, looking to leave the country. You know, there's all these different barriers, and society just isn't aware of the problems that them barriers create.
Yeah, what about yourself?
Yeah, there's so many, and I agree with a lot of what Damien's saying there in relation to the barriers, and I think some of the misconceptions as well is our own misconceptions. You know, like that everything's going to be the same. You know, you're away for so long, and you're away from your family, and you come out of the prison system, and it's sort of like, you know, you haven't changed, but the world has gone on.
Yeah,
in my case, sort of 12 years later, you know what I mean? So it's that sort of misconception that everything is going to be the same for me, and then you run into these barriers that you've actually spoke about, all these different barriers, and then how do we sort of navigate these problems that we face, which can be quite debilitating, especially when you've been sort of in a situation where everything's been in a sense done for you. You're sort of confined, and you're regimented, and everything is done, and like even walking a straight line.
Yeah.
You know,
The gates are open for you.
Like, you know, we for years you've walked in circles, and now you have to go and walk in a straight line and be mindful of traffic. Simple things. You know? So they're some of the misconceptions, some of the big ones, like psychologically.
What do you?
I would sort of agree with both of what you guys said, but for me it's society thinking that when someone goes to prison they're completely rehabilitated upon release, and then I sort of look at work that I'm doing now. A lot of people weren't rehabilitated into their community in the first place, didn't feel part of that community, so when they come back out into that community, it's like trying to mend something that was broken in the first place. And for that to be rehabilitated, you had to be in effect healing. Whereas a lot of times those guys and ladies were coming into a system that they weren't healing, and they were coming back out, and the misconception was that they've been in here for 5 years or 6 years, and they're completely rehabilitated, and they're going to fit back into the community, which they didn't feel part of in the first place.
And really valid, because that is one of the biggest misconceptions, in that, like, you know, we're in there and everybody thinks, oh well, they're in there, or even though they're being punished, they are getting the treatment that they need in order to go out the other side, when the reality is it's getting better. but it's not there yet. We're way away from sort of that.
The interesting thing, though, around this whole rehabilitation piece is that nobody can say with any certainty that you'll be completely rehabilitated. There's nothing to stop something happening down the road that sets us off our course. But the interesting thing is the more kind of serious offences, they're usually carried out by individuals where you'll often see it on the news. Jeez, I can't believe that guy did this, or I can't believe that this woman did that. She or he was an upstanding member of society. I can't believe that they did that to their children, to their loved ones, whatever. And they don't ever face any barriers around kind of vetting. You know, they don't even come to the attention of the guards. And they're actually, what happens is people that do the lower end crimes get caught up in the overarching reach of the vetting policy, and the real dangerous people kind of go under the radar, and bad things happen, you know.
Yeah. I know you want to quantify this by saying that, like, you know, I do believe that, like, there is a place for prisons. Like, there are some people in the world that really needs to be taken away from society. But if you're going to imprison a person, right, and leave them there without any sort of, you know, rehabilitative sort of program installed in the prison system itself, then what are you expecting to come out the other side? Like, reality is, if you put someone in a cage and you keep them there for 17.5 hours behind the doors, there's no stimulation for them. You're actually doing more damage to that person, a damaged person, as you spoke about, going in first. And you spoke of the same thing. A lot of people who be in the criminal justice system come from that socially deprived background. They're full of the aces, everything that comes along, and then they're put into a prison system, and there's nothing done then for them while they're in there. And that for me is the travesty. That for me is the injustice in there.
Well, when you go talk about like the population, the general population that's inside the walls, like I always say it's only 1 or 2% of the entire prison population that are them type of people that are a danger to themselves and everybody else. But for the most part, people are just ordinary people that made some bad mistakes and ended up where they did and served their time. And many of them plan for a fresh start. And unfortunately, society and the barriers and stuff like that prevent a lot of that. So that's kind of.
Would you agree if I said to you, like, the Irish system here is a punitive system, and like the majority of people who are in the system itself, I think should be treated from a medical perspective. Like we were looking now at Portugal, where they're decriminalising drugs and all that, and the majority of people who are in the prison system themselves are drug abusers, and you know there's a huge percentage of it, low education, you know. And yet, when we treat them through a retributive lens, where we sort of, it's all about punishment rather than sort of helping someone, like you don't sort of, and we've seen the amount of people with mental health issues who are in the prison system, that's huge. So how do we address that? Like, it's endemic, isn't it? It's a societal thing that, like, we need to sort of educate the society that this is not the way going forward, because there was a time when especially in Ireland, where drugs only affected a certain population. Yeah. Now it's affecting everybody. It's right across the board, and I think society are waking up to that, which is really, really helpful. Yeah. But I think we need to sort of look that bit further and say, actually, let's look at this from a different perspective completely.
Yeah. Well, it goes into that thing as well, like people do, you treat people like animals in prison. Ultimately, they are going to be getting out, and then you'll be letting animals out onto the street, like, so, unless there's a kind of I suppose, I use prison as a thing to kind of fix the behaviours that led me there, you know, and the full intention when I got locked up was straight to the education unit, straight to the work programmes, plan, have something to get going and hit the ground running. But you hit the ground running, but straight into a wall, and I think that's the type of work I'm kind of leaning towards.
I pick up on James's piece there. If you're an addict, should you be in a prison? Absolutely, you should not. You should be getting help for your addiction and support around care. You shouldn't be in a cell 17.5 hours a day thinking about how you get access to the drugs that you're trying to come away from. Yeah. While in a confined space, while in a wall where you can't do anything about it.
And when you're in prison and you've got people in there with mental health issues, like the psychological damage to someone who's never even used drugs, like you don't know when this person's going to sort of explode or anything like that. So like you're always, like you're constantly in that fight, flight or freeze mode. Yeah. And for any human being, that's not the way how we should be living. I mean, like under no circumstances. And that's a health issue. That's not a criminal justice issue. That's a health issue. Someone who's in that constantly in that space, fight, flight and freeze, should be treated.
Yeah.
And he should be, and there's no reason why we can't. And when we talk about costs, it's actually cheaper if you look at the NGOs who assist in all these things. You spoke earlier, well, we haven't spoke about it yet, but we got on to the fact that you're talking about this social enterprise system. How does that work? How can we encourage each other to work in situations like that? Because the problem I see is a societal problem, and it's something that we need to solve as a society. But to solve it from here, rather than try to be intellectual about it. Because for the last 100 years we've done that. Yeah. We're in a country that had a Breton law system in here, where we actually sat down and had conversations with society and said, okay, your person harmed my people, now you have to compensate us, something we need to do. So we were having them conversations. Today it's not. It's about, you've done something wrong, we're putting you into jail, and that's it.
Yeah.
The victims even, they're not even getting to say what's happening.
No.
So it's it's a bigger thing, I think, you know what I
Mm.
mean?
Do you have a question or?
Yeah. Oh, it's a little bit early. So I suppose this is a question that I have here is, how did you feel about coming into recovery? And like when we talk about recovery, I suppose we're talking about someone taking, like, and you spoke about it earlier when you said about, like, I made a decision to do certain things. So
Yeah.
the recovery journey.
Yeah, well, I suppose recovery, you have to suffer a bit, I feel, to kind of, unless you suffer, you're not going to kind of go on a pathway of recovery. What happened with me was I ended up like homeless, caught up in drugs. Couldn't wait to get to prison. Prison was actually going to be my home. It was going to get me off the streets and all that kind of thing. And but like when I talk about recovery, I don't talk about recovery from substances. I talk about recovery from a life of crime. You know, like I do have a drink every now and then. I don't use drugs anymore, but I know I can have a drink and leave it there and function normally. But when I talk about recovery, it's from a life of crime and bringing trouble around the house and impacting on everybody around me, the community, the family. I recovered from that, you know, and when I talk about recovery, that's what I mean. But recovery is a beautiful thing. Like, look at us here now. Like, you know, what we've gone through and stuff like that, and where we're at now in life. And you know, it's a hard journey. There's nothing easy about recovery, but the starting point for me was when I lost the clothes on my back. I was literally standing in the only pair of clothes I owned. That was all I owned in the world. I said, you know what, there has to be a better life out there than this. And it was kind of onwards and upwards from that.
Yeah, I'd sort of agree with that. I think my recovery started when I was basically asked to address someone by sir, and my number and my surname. And I hadn't used the word sir since I'd been in school. But I had someone stand in front of me that I had to address as sir. And that really for me was, in terms of a mindset shift, I said there and then, I'm not prepared to go through this when I get released from this system. My story was around drugs and alcohol. I was on it, you know, 4 or 5 times a week before I sort of had went into this sort of the justice system. So my recovery was actually staying away from drinking drugs, and then having access to services that each prison or prisoner could avail of. But it's up to them to take that step and avail of it. And a bit like yourself, I actually used the system to my advantage, every one of them. Because I was already thinking, I don't want to be back here. Because I don't want to be standing in front of a guy who's 6'3", 6'4", and saying to me, give me your surname and your number and address me as sir. And if you don't, you're going to spend 3 days
in the chokey.
In the chokey or in the block. I don't want to go through that. So my recovery got me away from drinks, got me away from drugs, got me away from the peer group that I was with, who were all involved in criminality and high-risk taking behaviours, into a regime and into a system that I could, after a way, adjust to, and then think while I'm there, how do I do something, because I have no educational background, how do I use this system while I'm here to try and do something post-release.
And I agree with a lot what you're saying, and for me, my journey was slightly different in that, I suppose, I'm a Dublin man, and I grew up in the culture of going to the pub, having a few pints, and you know, having a few, like whatever, you take the drugs, and it's all these little bits and pieces, and it was normalised and everything was. But then I got to a stage where I could not take it. It was sort of like it started to own me, and the only way I could, my journey then was inside. So my recovery is about me as a human being. It's about how I treated other people, how I treated people that I loved and people that I used, all that type of stuff. But it was an internal journey, and an internal journey to look at myself from all aspects of myself, and look at the shame and the guilt, look at the goodness in me, look at like what is it I wanted to do. Like I was in my 40s and I didn't even know what my favourite music was. Like I mean, you get sort of caught up in all this that you don't even know who you are anymore. You know what I mean? And this journey is about me. And like my undergrad was in law, and then I done a master's in education. But my biggest achievement for me was walking the Camino.
Yeah.
Camino for me was walking that was my biggest achievement. And I have my awards on the wall, and they're staggered in the same way. So my undergrad is here, my master's is here, and then my Camino is here, because for me that was the greatest gift I gave myself, was finding out who I was, and actually understanding that I'm not the person that society thinks I am.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not that man that like went to jail for 20 years. That's only a part of my journey. The real me I found out through the journey of recovery. Yeah. And that's been the most powerful thing for me going forward. So yeah, it's just and I think when people actually get that and understand that and then become that person that they want to be, then we're halfway there to being, you know.
Yeah, I just want to touch on what you said though, like about the kind of the shame and stuff. Like for me, I didn't want to go back home because of the shame. You know, you'd let down a lot of people. People might not like you. You know, they might not like what you did or whatever. So for me, I thought that relocating would be a good idea, but like it was the biggest mistake I could have made, because you can't run away from yourself. You know, yeah. You can run as far and as fast as you like, but you can't run away from yourself. And when I kind of came around and came home, and I was back surrounded by people that mattered and I cared about, that's when I became accountable, and that was a real, you know, when you took on the responsibility of starting again, that was the beginning, you know. And this whole thing of relocating and moving away from the environment, people say it all the time, I'm going back into the same environment and all this type of thing. But for me, that was the best thing that I could have done, was go back to the environment where it happened, so that and be accountable.
So and heal where your hurts were. You go back to heal.
Yeah.
And it's amazing, because like at the end of the day, like the journey is inward.
Yeah.
And like, you know, and all the stuff that I believed was a weakness for me being a man going forward, like anger and strength and power and all that stuff that I thought I really needed in my life, it's actually all lies. You know what I mean? You know, being honest and open, and you know, trying to help, and like when I help someone else, I'm not in my head anymore. And that's part of who, as human beings, that's what we should be all the time. You know what I mean? And so like finding this out was a revelation. You know what I mean? And this is not something that you can sort of learn. This is something that you have to look inside for. You know what I mean? Because we're all different.
Oh yeah, I agree with both what you're saying, and that's why it's so difficult. You have to do internal work on yourself. You have to become self-aware. You have to self-analyse, and then whatever you find and wherever you go in terms of that darkness, you have to be able to take yourself and then come out the other side and use it in terms of a strength. And as you said there, James, you know, all those things that men feel they should be in terms of powerful and strength, and you know, their temper and how they navigate life and how they hold things in, that's all nonsense. Absolutely nonsense.
Bravado.
When you actually do the work and strip the ego out of it, and you start to focus on how I made a mistake and how I want to personally do something in my life, that's a journey of self-discovery, and I think us three sitting here today are perfect examples of that.
Yeah, you get an awful lot more out of helping someone than you do fighting with someone. Do you know? Do you know what I mean? The reward, the feeling that you know you've helped somebody, you can't quantify. It's actually the best. Some of the best buzzes I've had in life is the fact that I've kind of helped people get on and move on. Like, it doesn't compare to the artificial buzzes I used to get off the drugs. You know, like that's my buzz now, is kind of helping people to move on and get on. I have another question here, lads. So. What was the hardest challenge when entering back into society, work, school and education? And there'll be a follow-up question as well, but we'll answer that one first. The hardest challenge entering back into society.
There's so many, like, you know, there's so many, because like, you know, like whether they're real or perceived, they're in your mind, and like when you have something in your mind, it's really difficult then to sort of determine what's real and what isn't, so you're sort of in that space. But like I remember when I was doing my undergrad, and I'm sitting in a lecture hall, and we've a lecture from one a senior counsel from the DPP, and he's sitting giving a lecture, and I'm sitting in the middle of a hall, And halfway through his lecture, he stops and he goes, "I know you." And I'm sitting down, the world could have swallowed me, you know, because he prosecuted me.
Okay, right.
And I'm sitting down looking and I've gone, no. And he's gone, "Oh, okay." So he continues on with his lecture. So the next morning, everybody had Googled me, and the whole college knew my back, because like I was, when you Googled me name, but thought it was the first on it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the difference of how people treated me then compared to how they treated me beforehand when they didn't know anything about me, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was fortunate in the sense that I was a little bit more mature, and I'd come to accept that, because that's for me it's all about acceptance.
Yeah.
Like, and that's what it boiled down to me, is accepting who I am, where I am now, and not judging myself on what happened to me in my past.
Yeah.
Knowing that today I could make a mistake, but tomorrow I can amend it. You know what I mean? And that's how I operate all the time, because I'm far from a perfect human being, and I don't want to be a perfect human being.
Yeah.
You know, but I do try.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things that, and the effect that had on me, that like how people treat you so differently, just because you've had a conviction compared to, and it doesn't matter what you've done or whether you're innocent or guilty or whatever it is. Once you're different to them, you're othered as such. You know what I mean? So, and that was one of the. As you say.
I had a very interesting journey back in. When I returned to my mum's house, because I was only 18, 19 at this stage, so I went back into my mum's house. So I was going back into the community, which in effect I needed to leave behind. The people within the community, in terms of my peer group, basically is what I needed to leave behind. So when I get out, 30 of them called to my mum's house with enough drink and drugs to kill 10 horses for a month.
Jesus.
And so they wanted to, in effect, put me back into that whole environment, and it actually conspired that out of that 30, there was a number of them under paramilitary threat. And if I had went back into that group, because remember I'd been out of that group for 9 months, so in effect I hadn't did anything in 9 months, but I kept doing what they were doing. So a lot of those guys were going to be punished, socially punished, as the term we use in Belfast.
Yeah.
So for the 5 years preceding that, I had a girlfriend in that area, and I had to walk past these guys every day, and they basically shouted everything under the sun you can imagine in terms of, you know, that pressure to sort of come back in, and I had to walk past them all the time, and they didn't want to do anything at that stage of their life, and I was trying to move into an education pathway, so I was getting up, you know, who do you think you are, coming away from us, trying to move into education, trying to better yourself, you're nothing but a scumbag, and all the stuff that they say, back to the labels and the stigma. And I think you mentioned an interesting point, James, in terms of when people research you and they Google you and you see the name, that label and that stigma is always there.
Yeah.
And when you go in to sort of meet someone, or you meet an employer, you're either going to be up front of them and say, this is my background, but it was a small part of my life, it was a chapter that's closed.
Yeah.
Here's what I've did and here's what I've learned, versus I'm not going to say anything and I'll let them Google me and then find out that what I should have told them at the outset.
Yeah. I suppose for me in prison, as I said earlier, like I wanted to go because I needed a roof over my head. I needed a space to get away from the noise that was going on outside and the trouble I was in. And I just wanted to get away and kick out the door and that type of thing. So then when I was getting out, there was a kind of a process put in place. There was a Harriston House was outside the prison wall. It's a rehab centre, drug rehab centre. And I was meant to be going there after, once my sentence was up, kind of thing, for a period of time. And it was actually the Christmas before I got out. It was on the news, funding got withdrew. So my re-entry plan changed. I got given a B&B for the night and a bus pass and off you go kind of thing. But I was moving out of that security, you know, the regime, the 3 meals a day, the roof over the head, the school, the education unit, the work programs, all that. It was taken from me and I just had to go with my bag and get on. And, you know, starting from nothing is really, really hard thing to do, like, you know. And only for the likes of the ASIOs and them types of organisations, they did link in with me, like, and they linked me in with the guy that gave me a place, and I kind of started to find my feet. But there was no continuity from prison to the community, because what happened then was they got me a course on a level 3 again, and I was after spending 3 years going through education and getting a really, really good education in prison, and then I had to go all the way back again. It just felt like a waste of time, and the desire, the determination, the positivity and everything built up ready for my release, it just disappeared, like, and it was going backwards. So that was one of the biggest challenges for me. the follow-up question is, what is the turnaround project?
So, the turnaround project is based in Belfast, and it offers a transitional support and employment model for those actually in the criminal justice system. So 6 months pre-release, the guys will join us basically on a working out scheme basically.
Okay.
So they're known as trainee employees basically, and they're paid 50% of the minimum wage. And we basically keep that, and when they're leaving, it's basically called a moving on grant. So you'll know that it depends what jurisdiction you're in. You're either given £46 and X, or you're given X in terms of money to leave.
Yeah.
So we keep this grant for them. So that if they've built that up over a 6 month period and they've worked 1 or 2 days, it's not a substantial amount, but it's a lot more than what they get in terms of.
That's a really good model,
Yeah.
because I always said that, like, I remember when I found my way into treatment, it was one of these Sister Concilio jobs where
Yeah.
you go in, they take your dole, it covers your costs, and they give you back a tenner a day. So your bed, board and everything is covered. They're managing that part of it, and you've got a tenner a day then to spend on your smokes and stuff. I always thought it'd be good to have like a financial service like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
that could put you on a right track with your money as well, like, you know,
Yeah.
because addicts don't really manage funds
No,
that well,
at all.
like, you know. So I always thought that would be a good
Yeah.
add-on. And what else do you do?
So, post-release, the guys then they're employed through 2 of our enterprises, so they then become transitional employees. So they're paid a wage like everyone else, and it's over the next 12 months we're trying to determine whether or not those guys are ready for a full-time job. So they can still work with us 2 days a week, get paid, and then they've got another 3 days if they're engaging with other services. So
Yeah.
addictions, mental health, you know, seeing the probation officers, etc. And at the end of that year period, we can then go to a conventional employer and say, Damien or James have been with us, they've showed up in time, attendance is good, punctuality is good, teamwork's good, ethics good. We would recommend that they would make a valuable member of your staff team, and it's up to the employer at that stage. That's informal, that's not a formal structure, and
No.
or can I see a CV? What's going to be on the CV? It's spent 5 years in prison.
Yeah.
It's what they've done from leaving. And we say that this guy's been working with us for the past 18 months to a year. We think he deserved an opportunity. And then they take him on a 5-day employment contract.
Yeah.
And that's them moving into independence.
Deadly, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I suppose the contrast for the south is that there is little NGOs around there, and it's all based on funding and who gets the funding and who doesn't. But I think there's always been this sort of a dichotomy around, like, you know, what's the IPS's position in this? And like, if we're really realistic, I mean, we don't expect prison officers to sort of rehabilitate prisoners, because that's not their job. I mean, it's like asking sort of the bin man to do surgery.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like, you know, but reality is that's how it is. But we try and sort of, as a society, look and say, well, maybe they should be doing this, and human nature dictates that. You know, nobody wants to do more than what they have to do in life in order to earn a living. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like, when you're walking behind as a prison officer and you're doing 60 hours a week, the last thing you want to be doing is to try to sort of sit down with a prisoner and engage him with him. And blue skies is brilliant, but there's an issue around, like, you know, for using NGOs to go into the prisons themselves to help with that rehabilitative path.
Yeah.
You know, and whereas, like, because, like, we all know, like, you know, relationships are based on trust. Like, and if we can't build up trust in amongst ourselves, and if we don't use what tools we have in order to build up trust, then what happens is the majority of people who's involved in the criminal justice system are skeptical at a minimum. I mean, they don't trust people. Like, they've grown up in a society that has labelled them and moved them around and sort of pigeonholed them and said, like, they're not good enough. From the time they were in school, they were the ones who were the dunces, all this type of stuff. So how do we build that up again?
Yeah.
And that's the $66 million question. But the answer is, it's not using the old system, to change things. It is in looking at what we're discussing here is, let's look at it from a different lens, through a different lens completely. If you're looking at it through a criminal justice lens, we haven't got the answers.
Yeah.
Criminal justice system hasn't got the answers.
Yeah.
We need to sort of shift the lens and say, right, okay, what do we want? And today it's affecting everybody in Ireland.
Yeah. Well,
Alcohol and drugs is affecting everybody in Ireland. Nobody has escaped it.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing, like I've heard it said amongst the NGO community, the social enterprise community, that there is an acceptance amongst the criminal justice sector that there is very little incentive to change, you know. But like I'd be the type of person that'd be calling out, on, why are you just accepting it, you know? What are you doing about it? Like, what? It's not good enough that you just accept there is no incentive to change. That really bothers me, that kind of thinking. Like on the other end, then you've got the people with convictions that believe in that their past will prevent them from securing opportunity, and not going above that. Then, so where's the bit in between, like, you know? And I suppose that's where the Spirit New project kind of comes in that it builds up, it helps people to build up the belief that, do you know what, we are a little bit more than our past, and the NGOs are kind of coming around to the way of thinking around the kind of certificate of commitment to change, that piece of information that is the incentive to change, you know, so trying to bring that in.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
No, it's an excellent piece of work you mentioned there, Damien, because back to sort of chapters in different people's lives. You know, if you're trying to gain access to a college or a university with no criminal record, but you've got 20 years professional experience in a specific sector, but you want to do a master's which is just slightly outside that sector, they'd still take that prior learning and that experience and that wisdom and expertise into basically their thinking in terms of whether they offer you a place or not. Surely the same should be done for those with criminal backgrounds who spent X amount of years in the system. There's knowledge, there's wisdom, there's expertise in it. There's a real mindset in it in terms of resilience and grit. You know, being locked up, managing your mind, managing your thoughts, you know, that builds real strength in people. And if they want to utilise that strength to go into education, then surely that should be taken into account.
We've done a fantastic piece of research. It was actually the first time the Department of Justice asked people with lived experience, what do we need to change, you know? So we done like a focus group on perceived barriers and real barriers, and formulated a survey that was sent out to the public. It was people with lived experience, and it was sent into the prisons, and it's actually been translated into like 8 different languages as well, like, so that people that don't speak our language can say what they think needs to be fixed as well, like. So it'll be interesting to see the outcome of that, but it is an acknowledgement by the Department of Justice that it is a broken system and it does need work, you know, so that more people can come out the other end like us, do you know what I mean? So
Yeah, and what I'm hearing you saying is that like there's a scope for men and women who've come through the system to try something that they'd like to do, or for them to be part of. I mean, like, we talk about society here and, like, you know, of fairness and, like, you know, equality and transparency, and yet if we look at sort of go to our government and say, like, how many prisoners are actually employed directly by the government?
no.
No, I don't know any. Like, I know lots and lots of men and women who've gone through and got masters and degrees and in every other, and they're fearful of applying for positions. I've got friends who've, you know, probably the best workers you're ever going to get in life. The skill sets that you spoke about, they may not be academic, but connecting with people and having conversations with people and bringing people together, that skill set that, you know, you can't teach.
Yeah.
And yet they're fearful of moving from a cleaning job to a job in the front of an office because they're, you know, my background is going to stop me. And employers are looking at them saying, well, actually you have a previous conviction, so I can't bring you to a government job because your card of vetting doesn't fit into the niche of what they want to do.
Yeah.
So you've got all these problems as well, where it's like, you know, if our government is really interested in assisting us and tapping into the wealth and the experience that we have, shouldn't they be the first to open the doors?
Yeah.
You know, shouldn't the
Lead
Department
by
of Justice and the Department of Health say, well, okay, let's employ guys like this. Let's employ, he's a master's in education. Bring him in, he's lived experience. Let's see how we open the door and how we can create a space for, you know, instead of treating someone from a criminal perspective, let's look at it from a health perspective.
Yeah.
Shouldn't we be doing that?
Yeah, leading by example. They should be leading by example. Yeah. If they want ex-offenders to move into employment, why not give them employment themselves? Do you know what I mean? So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the reality of it. And like the employment that I'm in at the moment, they gave me the opportunity. Like the board who employed me, because when I applied for this job, my background's in law, and I was going to study then to sort of become a solicitor, and then I sort of had to go through a process with the Law Society where they were going to decide whether I should be able to practice or not practice because of my convictions, and that took another year, and while I was doing, I done my masters, and part of what I do, as I say, like my journey was looking at myself, and I became a restorative practitioner, and all the stuff that goes, all the good stuff, and there was a job came up where we were working with young people, and it was sort of, it was blue sky sort of thinking. And it was a vision that I have, like, because I genuinely believe that if we invest in young people, that we're going to create a civil society that is mindful and understands how things are, and educated around the uses of the dangers of drugs and alcohol and everything else, and give them a place where they can actually be heard and listened to. Young people need a voice. So I applied for the job, and the first thing I done, you spoke about it earlier, where you say, like, you know, do I say nothing, or do I say, here's my criminal record, you know what I mean? But my criminal record was an advantage in some way to our board, because they looked and said, here's a guy with lived experience. We're going to be looking at dealing with young people that are sort of hard to reach, who are using and all that. Maybe a guy like him could engage them, you know, because he has that lived experience. And it was my board who sort of I originally sort of thought, I'm going to have to be self-employed because I'm unemployable and I have really good qualifications and I'm good at what I do.
Yeah.
But I never thought I'd be employed. But now I am, so, like, you know, there is. But they're NGOs then, that's not the government.
Yeah, they're NGOs.
You know, I think there's a real conversation to be had just at that level, James, because that's a systems change conversation. So you mentioned the government, right? So even if you look across all the government departments, they'll have a very strict regime in terms of criminal convictions and what level those criminal convictions were. Then if you drop that into the NGO sector as well, you've got a number of NGOs providing services to former service users who don't have any power in the decision-making process of those services.
Yeah.
So, you know, you've got 3 guys here who've left the system, all get educated, can articulate what is happening or where change needs to happen. But then you've got others within organisations who could do that same thing, but they're sort of working as volunteers on, you know, 50 hours a week with no pay.
Yeah, it's wrong, really, because, like, in fairness, it's so much easier to relate to somebody that has been through it. Like I always say, there was with my probation officer when I was dealing with him, like, and I always seen a probation officer as a part of the Gardaí or whatever. It was only when the shit hit the fan that I knew that man cared about me on a personal level and had good intentions for me and all that kind of thing. And when I seen the hurt in his eyes, I knew he was really on my side rather than a guard or that type of an individual. So, but if that was somebody that had kicked it down back the years and was able to tell stories about their own lived experience, I'd have been fully, I'd been well able to talk about what's going on with me right now, truthfully. Do you know what I mean? So.